Well, good morning, one and all. In fact, I've got to speak to one of my own to tell you to sit down, Philip. We're going to start right now. A very good morning to all of you. I hope you've helped yourself to breakfast to get you all powered up for the Sport at the Service of Humanity conference here at Georgetown University. My name is David Eads. I'm one of the Sport at the Service of Humanity team here. There are quite a few of us dotted around. I hope you'll get a chance to meet all of us over the course of the next couple of days. And I just want to say on behalf of all of us, we are thrilled but also really honoured that Georgetown University has seen fit to have this conference here and to include us in it. It means a lot to us. I think also just looking at the list of faith leaders, sport leaders, of academic figures, of philanthropy leaders, it speaks volumes to the power, the pulling power of this university putting on an event like this. So many thanks indeed for that. I was going to take a moment or two to give you a bit of background into sort of who we are in a way, Sport at the Service of Humanity, and a bit of the history. However, if you look at the program, that is sort of us. That is pretty much everything that I think we stand for. We've come to an understanding that there are 6 key values which run through every faith. I'm delighted to say we have a board here which has them all on there because I always forget one of them out of 6. Compassion, respect, love, enlightenment, balance, and joy, and they run through every faith. The lovely thing is they are key core values that run through every sport. They certainly should run through every sport. And these 2 incredibly powerful elements of our life have so much potential to bring these messages to everyone. And that brings me to the second strand of what we offer here at the conference. And it's sort of 3 pillars, really, because we are looking to drive these things. Inclusion. Everybody should have the opportunities that we have. Involvement. Everyone can be involved in creating those opportunities. And of course, inspiration. That's how we get there. We all need inspiration. I should just say a huge thanks to Georgetown Hoyas for last night's inspirational comeback. Phew. Nothing like a win to get off the mark. Nothing like a loss to get off the mark. Well done. Very pleased that that went so well. So that's the sort of inspiration we're looking for. I have one last remark. I might need to check with Monsignor Melchior on this. I don't know if you're allowed to paraphrase the Pope. Probably not. But Pope Francis really set us on our journey. He had a remark which we hold very dear. He said, challenge yourself in the game of life as you challenge yourself in the game of sport. And if you distill that down, it is a simple message. Live like you play. And that's a message we want to amplify through the course of this conference. So thank you all very much indeed for being here, nice and bright and early. Above all, though, Jack, thank you, Jack DeGioia, President of Georgetown University, for enabling this. I'd be delighted if you would say a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, David. We're honored to be with you, and we're grateful to you for your leadership. Well, welcome, everyone, and thank you all for your presence this morning. It's a pleasure to be with all of you as we gather for the 4th Sport at the Service of Humanity Conference. We've been honored to work alongside many partners in the planning of our time together. The Pontifical Council for Culture, led by His Eminence Cardinal Ravasi, has been responsible for this initiative since its inception. Monsignor Melchior Sanchez de Toca, who serves as Undersecretary of the Pontifical Council and who joins us today, our conference planning committee, and especially Val Ackerman, Commissioner of the Big East Conference, our colleagues in our Department of Athletics who've been integral to the success of this convening and its connections to the large Sport in the Service of Humanity initiative. And I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Sir John Key, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who will offer a keynote address later this morning, to Paul Tagliabue, the former Commissioner of the National Football League, who for many years served as chair of our Georgetown University Board of Directors, and Rich Hluchin, who currently serves as president of our Georgetown Alumni Association and is a member of our Board of Directors. I'm grateful to all of you for your presence and for your contributions to this convening. As David said, we began last evening at our men's basketball game against Mount St. Mary's. Who knew we would make it such an exciting night for everyone? But it's a time of joy as we open the season, and it was wonderful to be able to share the experience with so many of you here today. I could imagine no more fitting opening to our convening than in a celebration of the students who have spent many years of their lives preparing for this moment and who have sought to engage in their own work of formation through participation in sport. The Holy Father has described sport as an opportunity to express the joy of living. Through competitive sport, athletes experience, in the words of the Holy Father, the beauty of living in communion with others and with creation. Athletes have this extraordinary opportunity to communicate to everyone, especially young people, the positive values of life and the desire to devote it to the pursuit of high and noble goals. Close quote. Well, since this initiative was launched in the Vatican in 2016, inspired by the Holy Father, led by the Pontifical Council for Culture, the Sport at the Service of Humanity convening has gathered in following years at Villanova University in Philadelphia, at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and now this fall here at Georgetown. Across each of these conferences, we have been united by the three guiding themes that David identified: inspiration, inclusion, and involvement. These three themes have grounded our dialogue and given direction to the work that we have been called to take up. We look to athletes for inspiration. We look to teams for inclusion. We look for sports for a place to be involved, to find community. We have the opportunity here, through our conversations together, to contemplate sport and how it shapes each of us, how it shapes the communities of which we are members, how it enables us to deepen our sense of humanity, our sense of purpose, our faith. These are ideas embedded within the principles for the Sport at the Service of Humanity initiative, and I quote, "While we strive for excellence in sport, it is more important to aim for excellence as human beings." Close quote. So I'm grateful for this time with all of you. I want to thank you all for joining us over the course of these next 2 days. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Monsignor Walter Airby, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Apostolic Nunciature here in Washington, who will offer a blessing at the opening of today's session. He will also share a letter from His Holiness Pope Francis. Monsignor Airby, Monsignor Melchior will offer words of welcome from the Pontifical Council. First, Monsignor Airby, and then Monsignor Melchior.
Thank you, President Gioia, and good morning to everyone. It is true that I offer my prayers and my blessings and best wishes for this event that we hope will be successful and fruitful. But you will understand me if I don't dare to add my own blessing to the blessing of the Holy Father. So it's already. But I have the honor now to read for you the message that the Holy Father prepared for this event. To those taking part in the Conference on Sport at the Service of Humanity, Georgetown University. I offer cordial greetings to the organizers and participants in the Conference on Sport at the Service of Humanity taking place at Georgetown University. I thank President John Di Gioia and Cardinal Gianfranco Ravasi for making this gathering possible. Your conference, dear friends, provides an opportunity to reflect on sport as a means of personal development and achievement, challenging men and women to make the most of their God-given gifts. In this sense, It is not only about winning competitions, striving for medals, earning fame or money. Rather, sport, placed at the service of humanity, can lead to the overcoming of prejudices and the promotion of the gospel values of peace and fraternal solidarity. In today's world, torn apart by so many divisions, sport remains an area where people are able to meet without barriers of race, sex, religion, ideology, or physical condition, where we can experience the pure joy of playing and competing together to reach a goal, where success can be shared and defeat overcome. I encourage you always to uphold the dignity and beauty of the human person through the pursuit of athletic excellence. In this way, you will be able to promote the positive values of sport, both on and off the playing field. With the assurance of my prayers that your conference will bear good fruit, I willingly invoke upon all of you the abundant blessings of Almighty God. From the Vatican, signed by Francis.
Good morning. It is difficult to say anything after my my boss, Pope Francis, has spoken, but as responsible of these, one of the people who are at the beginning of this, let me say just a very few words. This conference today is the outcome of two important events. One is the Memorandum of Understanding between Georgetown University and the Pontifical Council for Culture, which is the Vatican Office for Culture and Sport. We have been doing a number of events and projects in other fields, literature, dialogue with non-believers, courtyard of the Gentile, science, and now sport. And it is this conference also the outcome of the Vatican Conference in year 2016, organized together with the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the International Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee and many other sport and faith-based institutions. On that occasion, it was October 2016, Pope Francis invited all to work together to promote positive values, inspire youth, and contribute to the betterment of humanity through sport, particularly bringing to life the Six Principles Declaration. Now, we all participated in many conferences, and it is easy to speak about values. But what is the real challenge is to live up to these values and to teach others to live up to these values. So this initial call from Pope Francis has grown and flourished through a series of initiatives, and we continue to strive towards the use of sport for cultivating inclusion, driving social change, and reaching out our potential, individual potential in life. The idea at the core of these conferences was to combine two sources: faith and sport, two worlds that do not always dialogue with each other. Religious faith represents for many, for us, the core values that links us to our ultimate fundamental of existence, our eternal destination, transcendent eternal destination. Sport, at the same time, offers a means of personal development and achievement along the path to that destination. Sport challenges us to give the best of ourselves That's the title of the Vatican document on sport. Faith communities and sport institutions working together and uniting resources can make a real difference, becoming an inspiration for personal life, creating more inclusive communities, open to all, inclusion, and offering up an opportunity for involvement to strive for a better society. Okay, so many words. Over these days, I would like to challenge each of us to think of and commit to one concrete action we will take when we leave that will carry the message of the conference toward our lives. So to avoid that this conference becomes a nice event that ends here, or a conference that sets the path to another conference where the same people gather and meet, but for real change. And finally, I would like to thank all organizers, partners, participants at this conference, and particularly Georgetown University, his president, Jack De Joye, and all the staff for making this gathering possible. Thank you to all, and good work.
Melchior, thank you very much indeed. And Melchior very pointedly set the scene for a moment there. We have set the room up, as you can see, for a particular reason, and it's not for a cabaret later, it's because you're going to be put to work to a degree. We're looking for those calls to action. And to explain how this is all going to come together, Eugenie Deek is with us. Eugenie is the Vice President of Strategy here at Georgetown University, and she is in charge, so listen up. Come on up.
All right. Monsignor said to us, let's commit to a concrete action. So what I'm going to lay out for you is how we're going to work through the day to do that. If you don't do this yet, but later, look in your materials and you will see a worksheet and a pen. So no excuses. Okay? And what we want you to do is, as we go through the major portions of the presentations and discussions today, is to reflect, because we believe through reflection we will be called to action. And so we're going to ask you to think about, what did you learn from the discussion, what additional questions you have, and what action should follow in each of these. And then at the end of the day, we're going to have conversations in small groups around these major discussions of the day, and you'll be asked just to pick one. So we'll huddle in corners and have a discussion about a call to action from that group, so that we go forward knowing that we are honored to be here today and responsible to take the work of today out into the world. Thank you.
Eugenie, thanks very much indeed. We have in our midst, as Jack said, we have someone who's flown in from Tokyo to be with us today. And you may know, some of you may not, there's been a significant event in Japan in the last few weeks. It's the Rugby World Cup, which has been staged to great acclaim, I should add. Sir John Key, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, was there, obviously supporting New Zealand, the All Blacks, recognised by many as the greatest team in sport in the world. I was a little bit uncomfortable about having to meet up with Sir John again, because England are obviously the greatest sports team in the world, and that was proven as they beat New Zealand in the World Cup. However, humble pie, because we were then thrashed by South Africa in the final. So no one emerges as a winner, but we can stay friends, I think, Sir John. Just very briefly to say, Sir John is, in sporting parlance, a serial winner. He won 3 elections on the bounce in New Zealand and was Prime Minister through the best part of a decade in the process, 2008 to 16. I won't go through the list of the things he was responsible for in some very challenging times, some humanitarian challenges as well within the country. But he represented, and he represents still, a country where I would say sport lies, in a way, at the bedrock of the community of the people of New Zealand. And it is a uniting force, I think it's fair to say. And to me, Sir John typifies that. He is also, I should point out, a representative for ISPS Handa Foundation, who's a global patron for sport at the service of humanity, partner and supporter of Georgetown's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs and the World Faith Development Dialogue. So John, it's lovely to see you again, and I'm delighted to pass the floor to you.
David, thanks very much for that introduction. I must admit, I come this morning feeling like a three-time loser because having come from the Rugby World Cup, I was there to cheer the mighty All Blacks on, who managed to lose, as David said, to England. Then having thought that no one could beat the All Blacks, England not only did, I thought I'd better cheer for them, and they lost. And then I'm a third-time loser because having arrived yesterday and deliberately trying to go to bed at a little bit later, about 11:30, I somehow stupidly managed to leave my phone on, and given I live in New Zealand, someone thought it was a great idea to ring me at about 1:30, 2 o'clock. So sport might be at the service of humanity, but it was also at my service as I watched the Golf Channel at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's the way we roll at the moment. I will just simply point out, in the 9 years I was Prime Minister, we never lost a Rugby World Cup when I was Prime Minister. I'm just, it was never lost a World Cup game, in fact, in the time that I was Prime Minister. So, I don't want to take sole credit for the All Blacks, but why not? When you're out of politics, you grab everything you can. Can I just begin by acknowledging President DeJoya and on the Monsignors, all of the dignitaries that are in the room. It's a great group, and it's fantastic to be here at Georgetown. Catherine's been saying to me for some time I should come and learn a little more about the campus and be here. So it's fantastic to be here. In a way, sport in the service of humanity sits at sort of the heart of something I started doing soon after I retired in 2017, because as David mentioned, I'm patron for a number of the foundations for Dr. Handa, who's a very, very well-known Japanese philanthropist. And Dr. Handa is an interesting guy. He really sits at the heart of the theme of your conference because he believes in the power of sport to transform lives and to see the good in people. And he's been really I think the leading proponent in the world of blind and disabled golf. But he wants to use sport as one of his foundations to do great good around the world. And so in 2010, when I was Prime Minister, we had the terrible Christchurch earthquakes, claimed the lives of 187 people, really shook the second largest city in New Zealand to its very core. And Dr. Hunter, who had been pretty involved actually in Australia, but not so much in New Zealand, decided he really wanted to demonstrate to the world that Christchurch was back open for business again, and what better way to do that than to sponsor a golf tournament, the New Zealand Women's Open, and amongst others, Lydia Ko, who's a very famous New Zealand golfer, came back from the tour to play in it and win the event. And in a way, it was just really trying to use the power of sport to build, the strength of humanity in the city that was, shaken to, as I say, its very, very roots and foundation. I kind of thought in my opening remarks, you've got a lot to think about over the next couple of days, but really, I suppose two challenges are maybe just to dwell on as you spend your time. And one is that we know we live in a divided world, and that's very evident. But one of the interesting questions is, can sport help bridge that division? And then second was really, can the skills that we learn through sport help us translate into building a more collective and inclusive view of humanity? Can we learn from those who excel if we're alongside them, or even if we just support them? We know the world is a very divided place. Quite tragically in New Zealand in the early part of this year, some of you, maybe all of you, will know that we had a terrible shooting from a white supremacist guy who took with a machine gun to the followers of a number of mosques around Christchurch and killed 51 people. So really the worst gun violence attack we had in New Zealand probably for a very, very long time indeed. So we know the world is divided from people who have some very sick and disturbing views. And in fact, one of the things I used to spend a lot of time talking about in New Zealand, because we're a very multicultural, multi-denomination country actually in New Zealand, was all the good that actually came out of the Muslim faith. Often actually misunderstood, I think, by some leaders around the world and others. But again, if you want to look at that division, only a week, I guess, ago, the leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, took his own life. But there was a person who believed that if you couldn't follow his version of his faith, then you didn't deserve to have a place on the planet. So we know it's a very divided world, sometimes for religious reasons and views of others. I think we know on a human rights perspective that's a very divided world. Certainly not all countries are equal. And we know from a gender perspective, although tremendous gains have been made, and again in New Zealand, I like to think we're the country that first gave women the chance to vote at every level in our country, from Prime Minister to Governor General to the largest company to the Chief Justice. All those positions have been occupied on several occasions by women. But we know that division is there still in many countries. And actually, in recent times, I'm a bit saddened to say, because I'm a massive fan of globalisation. There's been a real division, I think, coming through anti-globalisation, if there's such a word, a sort of fortress mentality view, where we're starting to test. Sadly, I think actually through some of the thinkings of the current US president about whether the basis of organisations like the United Nations and others are soundly sort of held. We certainly know from a cultural perspective, we live in quite a divided world, and we know from the expectations of democracy in countries that again is divided. So I guess if you look at that world and you sit there and you say we can see all the challenges, can sport play a role actually in bridging those divisions? And what do we learn about ourselves when we engage in sport at any level, from the most significant level of participation at a professional sport right through to the young person that just engages in their club or whatever they might do? I think the first thing we learn is that hard work translates into better results. I'm a bit of a golf tragic, so you'll excuse me if I quote a few golfers, but Lee Trevino was very famous as a golfer for saying he was lucky, and the more he practiced, the luckier he got. And I think we learn, out of sport that hard work really does, and can change your life. I think we learn out of sport actually that winning feels good, but actually, funnily enough, we learn more when we lose often in sport than we do out of winning. And that's certainly something that we can take into our daily lives. And we have to learn actually at the capacity to win has to come with an acceptance that you sometimes lose. I think we learn through sport the enormous health benefits there, and I think it's there for everyone to see, that you just feel better and you live longer, and you have all sorts of great things that come out of that, and you certainly learn teamwork. And I think through sport, one of the ways that it helps to serve in terms of a better sense of humanity is now because it's global. And, as we mentioned, it came from the Rugby World Cup. Next year, Japan is the host of the 2020 Summer Olympic Games. And you just can't help but, go to a country that maybe, I've been there on lots of occasions, but there were lots of guests that would have come to Japan who knew nothing about the country from a cultural perspective, nothing about its people, probably very little about its history, certainly nothing about its language. But through the power of sport, they learnt, that there was probably a lot that they had in common. And it allows you to humanise, I think, what can be in some countries very abstract sort of concepts. And I think one of the interesting things around the world, as I said, I'm a massive globalist, and New Zealand's been at the forefront of leading trade deals around the world. In fact, in my time when I was Prime Minister, along with President Obama, we really tried to drive the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a trade idea. But the reason that I like trade, other than I think it actually lifts people out of poverty and it helps generate increased wealth for everyone involved, is it's, I think a well-known fact that, when countries trade together and when they economically are combined, they're far less likely to be involved in conflict. In fact, one of the basis of the, European foundation really is that countries want to be part of Europe because they believe historically, when they haven't been so combined, they've engaged in world wars that have taken place. And I think sport can do the same thing. I think it can bridge that division. And you look at some of the most frostiest of times between the United States and the old USSR. That was a time where all sorts of challenges were in place on a political perspective, but we still saw the United States and the USSR competing, at ice hockey or at baseball, and trying to get, I think, a better understanding. And I certainly think that one of the ways it builds a stronger humanity is through tolerance. As I said to you, Dr. Hunter's been, very vocal, very generous, very involved actually in blind and disabled golf, which conceptually think about is quite a difficult thing to do. The concept of the game actually is to see the ball go in the hole. So if you're blind, it's not the easiest thing in the world. But what actually he's taught people, and I think what it does teach you through the power of sport actually, is to judge people not on what they can't do, but what they can do. And I think that's a very, very powerful concept. So it has that ability, I think, to bridge and unite. Can it, I think, resolve every issue? I mean, we're here today talking about sport and its place in humanity. And the answer there is absolutely not. But it is one factor. Does it help? In my opinion, yes, it does. Partly, I think, actually, because we live in a world that's full of propaganda. It's full of myths and it's full of misinformation, actually. And what sport does actually is allow people, I think, to have experiences with real people, to hear real stories, and to judge actually for themselves actually about what a country might be like or what its people might be like. And I think within that you actually see, some of the most touching stories in sport are not the person that's winning the gold medal, but it's the act of kindness of somebody that in the marathon picks up someone who's collapsing and sacrifices their own place on the dais to help somebody, in a moment of sort of real trauma for them. So I think, through that sport, you can build a much stronger humanity. And in part, actually, the reason for that is because sport doesn't have a language. Sport isn't tied up in a lot of ancient sort of history. It's not guided by historical borders. It is what it is, that something which collectively around the world people can understand and associate with. So I think, just to finish, what I would say is that we all strive to live in a world which is a better world. And at its most basic point, that can be traced back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But it's a pretty low standard in a way. I mean, it's a standard that sadly isn't achieved around the world in every country. But, food and shelter are a sort of basic starting point. But actually, we want to live in a world that has a sense of humanity which is much greater than that. It's one where we live in a world that's dominated, hopefully, by peace and by kindness, as I think is to my right. Where people can live and have opportunities for betterment and a sense actually that they can change their own lives, where they get joy from their own families, and where they're judged not by the colour of their skin or by their gender or by their religious beliefs, but actually by their actions and by their deeds. And I think that's the very point, that sport sort of at one level humanises all of us. It brings us together, and it grows I think, building blocks of a much stronger nation and world, whether it's because we support the university basketball team, whether it's because we support the town of the local club, whether it's for the region that we live in, whether it's the country that we associate with, or whether it's because we're interested in sport at a global perspective. And as I said, next year, Japan will host the 2020 Olympic Games. In a sense, in my view, it's sport's version of the United Nations. Countries come together to compete against each other, to show the world their athletes. But actually, it's a lot more than that. Like the United Nations, is a place where people can come together, hopefully to see the good in others, to learn a little more about others, and to see for themselves that the world is a stronger place when we are united in one forum. And I think if sport can play that role, as I said, I don't think it can solve every problem. I don't think it is the panacea to every issue, but can it build a stronger humanity? Does it have a place that we can all want to attest as better? In my view, you can be the judge of that, but I think unquestionably yes. And when you watch the Summer Olympics next year, be a judge of whether the world is a better place for that forum or a worse one. I, for one, will be voting that it's a better place. Thank you very much.
John, thanks to you very much indeed for your very wise words there. You mentioned identity near the end, which again, I think that's what sport does offer. It creates an identity. Can I just ask in the room, how many of you here have been to New Zealand? A good few of you. I would recommend it. It's a wonderful place to go. You'll be glad that I've given it that plug, John. You also once described it, I think, as it's like England, but without the attitude. And better weather, which is also probably true. That is a great platform for us to move on to our first panel session, the title of which is Reflecting on Sports and Engaging with Questions of Values. So the first thing I'd like to do, it's great, all ranged up at the back, ready to go. Can I ask our panelists and our moderator, please come up and join us? Thank you. So reflecting on sports and engaging with questions of values. As they do so, come right on up. Great to see you. Nice to see you. Hi, how are you doing? Hi, Christine. Very nice to meet you. You too.
Thank you.
So please take a seat. My job is very simple because I'm going to be handing this over to Paul in just a moment. But let me very briefly introduce our panelists, and you can wave vigorously when your name is mentioned. Michael Serrazio, Associate Professor at Boston College. Michael's written a very, well, among other things, very interesting book on the power of sports, media and spectacle in American culture. Michael, thanks very much for joining us. Victor Cha is Professor and Vice Dean for Faculty and Graduate Affairs and is author of, well, many books, in fact, a concentration of expertise here across Asia, in particular relations between South Korea, Japan, China, and rather beautifully in context of our panel session here, the author of Beyond the Final Score, The Politics of Sport in Asia. And Christine Brennan, you don't need to wave really, Christine, I think it's, you know, and one of the most, well, I'd say outstanding and recognizable faces in American sports journalism. Christine has covered, am I right in saying, every Olympic Games since LA '84? She has stamina.
I started when I was 10.
Down a bit. Christine's worked for the Miami Herald, Washington Post, USA Today as a columnist now, very familiar on virtually all the major US networks as well as a commentator and analyst, and a very powerful voice for inclusion as the first president of the Association for Women in Sports Media. Thank you very much for joining us. And Paul Eli, I'm going to hand over to you, Senior Fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs. Again, these biographies are sort of so simplistic, it's untrue. But Paul has contributed on so many different areas, which include issues of Bach to the Saints of Self-Help, to publications of his, not to mention The Life You Share May Be Your Own, an American Pilgrimage. Paul, thank you very much for agreeing to moderate this panel. I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sir John, and thank you to Monsignor Melchior and to President Gioia and to everyone else who's taken a role in convening us. It's quite a privilege to be here and to have you and everyone else here on the Georgetown campus for this event. It's often said, not just in Washington, that politics is our religion. It's also often said, especially lately, that politics has taken on some of the characteristics of sport. Just yesterday, the New York Times ran a piece setting out Adam Schiff's game plan for the public phase of the impeachment process. So, is it possible by some transitive property of metaphor to say that religion is our sport? I hope not. But it is possible to reflect on the fact that in many ways sport could be said to be something like our religion, to have aspects that overlap with religion. Reflection on ritual and symbolism, involvement of culture, the participation of people across national borders, questions of values, questions of how those values are communicated in wider society. With that in mind, I'd like to just try to stay out of the way and invite our three panelists to speak briefly to the issue of reflecting on sports and engaging with questions of values. They can say anything they want, but I'd like to open with Michael Serrazio discussing the relationship of sports and religion, and then turn to Christine Brennan, who can engage with the question of how sport and politics especially have come together domestically. Christine said the other day that to discuss sports and values now is like driving on a 12-lane superhighway. It's just incredibly complicated. And then to Victor Cha, who can speak to the question of sport and politics and values internationally. Michael?
Great. Well, first off, let me just offer my thanks as well to President DeGioia, to Father Mark Bosco, to Joe Ferrara, Aaron Hudson, to our moderator, Paul Ellie, my fellow panelists, and all those involved in making this event possible today, for the generous invitation. It's really very, very humbling to be a part of the speakers today. And I truly believe that the conference theme could not be more timely and topical. For serving humanity is the greatest contribution that sport can make to our lives and our culture. It needs to do this because sport takes a great deal from us. Globally, the industry is worth somewhere between $200 and $700 billion, depending on who's counting. Tickets, broadcast rights, sponsorship, apparel, facilities. In many ways, I would argue sports makes us act fundamentally, economically, irrationally, whether that be taxpayer financing of stadia or even more simply buying a pair of branded sneakers. Why, though, do we worship at the altar of sports myth when it costs so much? The answer and the esoteric essence of fandom might be found at an altar of a very different sort, one far removed from sports. Emile Durkheim, I believe, has some answers for us. He was the pioneering sociologist who wrote in the wake of the Industrial Revolution a century ago, an age that tore apart traditional communities and freighted individuals with what he called social anomie, that feeling of disorder and alienation that still plagues our modern world. Yet to understand how people could ideally be stitched together by a collective conscience, he had to go back to religion in its simplest form, where he excavated a profound, efficient conclusion. Whenever a group or society worships a divine form, it is in fact also simultaneously worshiping itself. Religion is not then just about the cosmic order, it's about social order. Religious totems, while officially symbolizing deities, implicitly offer vessels for fellowship, licenses to congregate together. There's something universal and enduring in that tribal yearning. We need it still today desperately. Yet much of the Western world has profoundly secularized over the centuries. Today, nearly 60 million Americans count themselves as religiously unaffiliated, and formal faith no longer defines reality and forms the basis of identity and community as it once did. Sports culture, I would argue, helps fill that vacuum. It articulates the language of belief. It furnishes homilies of moral judgment. It structures systems of meaning-making, and it paves pathways to transcendence. Sports culture simulates the human experience long derived from faith when many are formally divorced from it. More than 1/4 of all Americans believe that God has some role in determining who wins a game. Another 1/4 have prayed to God to help their team. And more than half think that God rewards athletes of faith with success and health. Through sports, we think, feel, and act spiritually. What totems therefore survive and persist in contemporary American culture, even as religion's centrality wanes and fewer collective practices yoke tribes together? The Red Sox, the Packers, the All Blacks, the Hoyas, and so on. That's more essential than ever in an era of deep cultural fragmentation and communal breakdown, when we've lost faith in all manner of public institutions. Information cocoons filter out contrary representations of ideological reality. Political polarization charts new depths of hatred and disgust. Yet we also have entertainment cocoons that define our time, smartphone distractions that seclude us alone together in social settings, the algorithmic targeting of pop content that splintered taste beyond blockbusters, once broadly cast to mass audiences. And the bewildering complexity of today's best TV content repels casual consumption and therefore common conversation. You can't simply drop in on the Game of Thrones season finale without massive time investment beforehand, and in my case, Wikipedia and a notepad. Game 7 of the NBA Finals is considerably less befuddling, even if you didn't catch the previous 6. In short, peak TV is great for art, less so for widespread social communion. Sports, on the other hand, still offers the glue of collective conscience that the acid of modern life has otherwise dissolved. In large part, this is because sports tells us what time it is. They anchor players and fans alike in the present moment, concentrating a vast shared psychic energy on events unfolding before us right now. They orient observers, synchronize schedules, coordinate collectivity. Last year, sports made up 89 of the top 100 most watched TV programs, and they are the biggest reason that your cable bills have exploded. Being in the moment is incredibly valuable for advertisers in a time-shifted age of DVR and streaming, but it's also existentially critical for the rest of us, living through asynchronous postmodernity, when people seek mindfulness individually and co-presence socially against the onslaught of distraction and multitasking. Unlike most all forms of entertainment and pop culture, sports resists being on demand. It instead demands of you co-presence with others at specifically scheduled intersections. They're called Manchester United, not Manchester Atomized, for a reason. There's something sacred in that communal immediacy, that ephemeral ecstasy of everyone seeming to be on the same page as the scroll of history unfolds. The most people in the history of humankind to share the same experience at the same time are audiences for recent international sporting events. Former NBA Commissioner David Stern told me this when I interviewed him for my last book. Quote, "As life gets more impersonal, as we retreat into our homes and we do a tremendous amount from the comfort of our smart devices in a chair at home, the last places that people are likely to gather are going to be houses of worship and houses of sports worship." I agree. Indeed, it might be that most basic of human dreads, mortality, that drives us into the arms of sports community. This might explain my late grandfather's San Diego Chargers hat sitting on the mantle of my aunt's fireplace. In one intriguing experiment, researchers found that when prompted to think about death, fans expressed even greater hope and faith that their teams would win it all, suggesting that we are driven to associate with institutions and cultural groups that live on to help cope with the persistent, anxiety-inducing finitude of our own existence. In that sense, it doesn't really matter whether our favorite team wins or loses on the field of play. As long as the sports totem survives, so do we. And with that, I'll pass it over to Christine.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much to all of you here at Georgetown for inviting us and inviting me to be here. A big shout out to Katie Button, who started the email chain with me, and Aaron, who's back there somewhere organizing all of us. Thank you for everything you've done. To my friends at Georgetown, and been in town since 1984, what a wonderful campus and what a great legacy you provide to this city, obviously to the country and the world. So it's an honor for me to be here with this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. I love this topic. This is basically the topic that I guess the best description maybe of my job, or the jobs that I hold now, and that is sports as culture. You know, there was a day when we saw sports as an escape. You know how you would grab for the sports section, and already now I've dated myself and all of us in this room talking about grabbing for a sports section, and thank you to those of you who still do. But you'd take that sports section, and I guess it would pertain, you'd go to your iPhone or iPad and click on sports at whatever destination you prefer, and it would be an escape. It would take you somewhere that the A section of the newspaper did not. And of course, what has happened now, and no apologies, and in fact, I think it's a good thing, but it is an interesting progression that we have made. What's happened now, of course, is that the sports section is no longer an escape, but it is a mirror of our society. And when you grab that sports section, other than, say, a week ago, where you certainly saw a lot of sports in terms of baseball and the World Series in this town, which is still unbelievable to me that the Nationals pulled that off. But there are days, of course, when it is just fun and games. But so much of those sports sections and those stories and those pages, those headlines that you read, whether it's in print or online, those stories are about much more than sports. And whether it's contract negotiations, whether it's an athlete or a coach being suspended, whether it's steroids, whether it's the horrors of USA gymnastics and the Larry Nassar story, the Penn State story of a few years ago, Jerry Sandusky, on and it goes. Discipline, negotiations, fights, confusion, concern in sports, whatever it might be, that's where we are. And I'm sure there are some of you in this room that are lamenting the fact that this is where we are, that are wishing for other days, those old days, the good old days when we didn't know that Babe Ruth, a million years ago now, but that Babe Ruth was running around chasing women through a train, and everyone was half naked, and the sports writers who were playing poker at the table looked up and saw Babe Ruth running through, and can you imagine now? The iPhone pictures and the tweets, and Babe Ruth would probably, his career would be over by the next morning. And so it's a great question. It's a question I ask myself all the time. Are we better off, were we better off not knowing about Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or you name it? Or are we better off knowing? And obviously you have a journalist sitting in front of you, and I, of course, 100 times out of 100 say we are better off knowing. And knowledge is power. And frankly, as consumers, and Michael, it was fascinating what you said and how you described it. I thought it was just pitch perfect. And I learned a lot as well from what you just said. As consumers, I would make the case that you would want to know these things. You know, is the shortstop or the third baseman or the center fielder who you're cheering for, was he suspended last year for steroid use? That can obviously help you make a decision on where you want to spend your money. Do you want to buy tickets? Do you want to take your kids and cheer that person on? The answer often is yes, because then sports reverts back to that escape. And I understand this too, that the last thing you want to hear, if you've decided to go to an Orioles, Nats game, wherever, you know, any sporting event, Mystics game, Georgetown men's, women's hoops, whatever, the last thing you want is someone like me tapping you on the shoulder, obviously figuratively, not literally, and saying, hey, well, you know, that person out there, they were cheating and this one and that coach has had right? You want the escape. For those from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night, you would like to escape the real world and enjoy a sporting event. And that is the push-pull. That's what I see all the time on social media. Really, do we have to know everything? Do we have to discuss everything? And as a journalist, I would say, I'll give it to you. If you decide to use it in your calculations, fine. And if you don't, that's fine too. But I would make the case that you certainly want to know if a car is being recalled. You've put your money into that. So why wouldn't you necessarily want to know what's going on in sports and have all this information. I could make the case also that we are now in an era of over-coverage. Certainly, we have, I don't know if you can ever have too much information, but if you can, we're there with social media, with journalists mixing with citizen journalists and everyone else with an iPhone or a camera, or using their iPhone camera. And those are interesting discussions, and we may well want to talk more about that. We were chatting about that superhighway. So as I've covered sports, and I've covered far more men's sports than women's sports, but I'm kind of known for being someone who has covered women's sports and those issues, proudly so. Title IX, I think the most important law in our country the last 50 years. I know there's a lot of competition for that honor, but I would say that we haven't even begun to see the value. It's just starting to see it, but in terms of leadership for women, Congress, Senate, women running for president, going into the 20s, 30s, and 40s, running our universities, running our businesses, our nation. I think the common denominator for all those women, who might be some of them you've seen in your kitchen every morning for 18 years, all those women, the common denominator will be that they played sports because of Title IX and learned those life lessons about winning and losing at a young age and teamwork and sportsmanship. And I really, truly think Title IX will change the way this nation is run, is built, is led over the next half century or so. We haven't even, as I said, begun to see the magnitude of what Title IX will bring to this nation, this tidal wave of Title IX. But sports as culture really has become my thing. And so where sports and culture meet, as I said, is this 12-lane superhighway now. And the president is there. Certainly the Washington Nationals going to the White House, and I've covered those visits for 30 years. First time that I've ever seen a team actually bring partisan politics into that, with Kurt Suzuki wearing the Make America Great Again hat. Not making a statement on that at all, but just the fact that the Nationals did that was very, very interesting. And in this town, of course, in this city with DC and Northern Virginia and Maryland obviously being very, very blue, just a fascinating business decision, and why the Nats allowed that to happen and let a player do that. Again, whatever your political persuasion. I've never seen it before. No one showed up at a Bill Clinton Olympic team rally with a Monica Lewinsky hat, right? Or at a Obama thing with a pro-Obama or against Obama. Maybe an athlete did show up with a hat or a placard or a pin or a t-shirt, and an adult would have probably just swooped in and taken that away. And the Nats did not do that to Kurt Suzuki, and that is a fascinating conversation, especially in a town that is so well-read and so smart, and people are so aware, as Washingtonians in the area are. So these are the kind of issues that I delve into, proudly so as a journalist. I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel and able to discuss those issues. And the last point I'll just make is that sports takes us to national conversations, as you were alluding to, Michael, that frankly, I think sports helps us with those national conversations. So the Larry Nassar USA Gymnastics horrors. Well, a whole different audience was exposed to that because it was about sports. And then, of course, about so much more than sports. And we're talking about it, though, as sports journalists, and who's reading about it who might never have read about that issue in another forum. The same thing with Jerry Sandusky and those horrors, and I keep mentioning terrible things, but these issues, when sports takes us there, I think we're all better off as a community, as a country, as a world, to have others who might not have been included, but they're sports fans or they're readers or consumers of sports, and now they're part of that conversation that is so important, not just for sports, but of course for our culture.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I too want to express my gratitude. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank President DeGioia for this wonderful opportunity. I'm actually very thrilled to be here, but I'm a little bit embarrassed because I'm kind of an interloper in this topic. My area is actually U.S. national security, and I came into this discussion of sports and politics just by chance. I returned to the university after the university granted me a public service leave. I worked at the National Security Council at the White House for 3 years. working largely on nuclear weapons issues, and I was one of our negotiators for the last nuclear agreement, or denuclearization agreement with North Korea. I came back to the campus, and I got inundated by requests from publishers and from news organizations to write a book about North Korea. And I said, I've been working on this issue for 3 years. The last thing I want to do is write a book about it right now. Instead, I said, I want to write a book about sports and politics, because this was at the time when we were going to have the Olympics in Beijing. So I became very interested in this topic, and I find it infinitely more fascinating than denuclearization, nuclear weapons, nuclear security. So let me just tell you what I think about this issue, and then we can have a general conversation. So in the book that I wrote, I talked about the relationship between sports and national identity, sports and diplomacy, and sports and development, how hosting sporting events like the Olympics can really change the entire face of the cities that host these things. But what I want to focus on, sort of drill down on this morning, is sports and values. You know, as Michael has talked about, and as our initially opening speakers talked about. And what strikes me about sports and values is that sports in many ways embodies sort of the classical liberal values. I mean, it's about transparency. Everybody knows the rules, right? It's about fair play. It's about inclusion, right? It doesn't matter what your religion is, what the color of your skin is, and it's about merit. It's all about, like, the best performance wins, right? And so what's interesting to me about that is that when you look at the dynamics of those sorts of values that sports embodies, and they come into contact with host nations or host cities or markets that are politically run by governments that don't hold those values. Right? And so how do those two things come together? And the case in particular that I've been looking at recently is, of course, the NBA and China. Right? As many of you know, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, while the NBA was playing, the Houston Rockets was playing an exhibition game in Asia, retweeted a statement about standing with the protesters in Hong Kong. The protesters are seeking autonomy from the government in China. And the Chinese responded very negatively to that. They demanded that Daryl Morey be fired. They removed all Houston Rockets sporting paraphernalia from the web and from stores. And they blacked out all Houston Rockets games. And the reaction by the NBA was to immediately pull down Daryl Morey's tweet, to apologize for what had happened. And while the NBA has said we still believe in freedom of expression, you know, I think both the NBA and the agents of the players have basically, you know, executed an implicit gag order on NBA players. Don't say anything about the politics of China. And so, on the one hand, you can understand, you know, the business reason behind this, right? The NBA is a over $4 billion market in China. Basketball is the #1 sport in China today. There are as many, if not more, people who play basketball in China than there are Americans in the United States. There are over 600 million people in China watched an NBA game in the last season, which is, you know, that's pretty astounding. The Chinese emerging middle class market for the NBA is larger than the entire population of the United States, right? So you can see the business reasons behind this. At the same time, though, you know, I'm not really certain that this is the answer, right? Because for the NBA to shut themselves down because China is leveraging their market for political purposes is very similar in practice to what China has done in other cases. So in Norway, when the Nobel Peace Prize Committee gave the Nobel Peace Prize to a Chinese political dissident, China unilaterally stopped the import of Norwegian salmon, right? They didn't stop salmon from Scotland, they just stopped salmon from Norway. When they got into the dispute with the Philippines, they stopped the import of Philippine bananas. When they got into a dispute with South Korea, they focused on one particular South Korean company and caused it to have over $2 billion in commercial losses. So this is a practice that we've seen before. But I think maybe the NBA China may have met its match in the NBA. Because the big difference between the NBA and Norwegian salmon is Chinese people don't really care if they don't eat Norwegian salmon. They really do care if they can't watch the NBA on TV. And so to me, it's a very interesting dynamic because on the one hand, there clearly are business decisions why the NBA chooses to do what it's done with regard to political comments by NBA players. On the other hand, on this particular issue, China is executing the same sort of strategy they've executed in the past, but they may have bit off more than they can chew. I'm not saying that NBA players should go out and be political. They should not. They should not go out and be political. There is, as much as we like to try to maintain a separation between sports and politics, as Christine and Michael said, you cannot really pull those things apart. However, if there is a player or an individual who makes a statement as a human being about what they see happening in another place, the NBA shouldn't shut that down. They should allow these people to speak. Maury tweeted on his personal account. He didn't tweet on a Houston Rockets account. These are personal views expressed by people as human beings about what is happening in another part of the world. And that is a very positive thing. And that is something that we should embrace. It's not something that we should try to reject. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor, and thanks to all three of you. Just listening to you speak, I realize my own status as an amateur, but I also realize that an amateur is respected in the world of sport. So let me just try to run a connecting thread through your remarks and invite each of you to pick it up, beginning with Christine, I hope. What strikes me is the way each of you has proposed that the fact that we no longer can separate sport from culture and values is a good thing and a necessary thing. I'm with you on that. As a journalist, of course, we should always know more, and we don't want to go back to those old days. The discussion about the NBA and China was a necessary discussion and one that's ongoing. And the forces of unity and community that are offered by sports are real. All that said, I kept hearing the Marxist word opiate. Marx called religion the opiate of the people, and I'd like to at least counter-propose that there's an element of sort of surrogacy in the place that sports occupies in society today. That necessary as it is to discuss domestic violence among athletes, that there's only so many hours in the day, and in some respects that displaces other conversations that could happen. That necessary as the discussion about the NBA in China was, that we wound up talking about the free speech rights of NBA players and owners rather than about the rights of people in Hong Kong to self-determination. Yes, we all stop our lives to watch a sporting event, but is that real community? Manchester United is called Manchester United, but that's because various smaller clubs in Manchester got together as one club. And there's another club in town called City, Manchester City. That the idea of unity is pretty thin if you push at it. So with that in mind, can we just kind of go back down the row and will you engage with that proposal that, true as all this is, that it's taking up a space that maybe could be taken up by other things?
Well, I could certainly make the case that sports has gotten too big, right? And what you're saying, that's kind of a little bit of a corollary of, I think, what you're saying, because in some ways we want to enjoy sports. Like, can we just have fun with it? I do think there's something for everyone, right? If you want to focus on LeBron James, and I did a column on his comments, which I thought were atrocious. You can focus on that. If you want to just focus on the start of the NBA season, of course, you can choose that. The old days of having 3 channels and everyone watching Mary Tyler Moore on Saturday night and everyone talking about it Monday at school, or Happy Days, right? Well, we don't have those days anymore. So now you can pick and choose. So I'm not so sure that I'm concerned that the space is so full because someone else, I'm sure some of you at the table, would be totally into this conversation about the NBA, say, or about Kurt Suzuki wearing the MAGA hat. And then I'm sure some of you are just, let's relive Game 7, right? Or Suzuki's amazing home run, or whatever it was. You know what I'm saying? And so there's something for everyone. But my first comment that I made back to you, Paul, was that I think sports has gotten, it's big as it should be because it's as big as what our society wants. It will change and morph as we want it. My concern, if you let it trickle down to, say, the high school, the kid level, the club level, which is something we really haven't touched on, but that's probably where sports really is in most of the lives of us in this room. Your children, your grandchildren's sports, the question of specialization, of club play, of parents, I'm sure no one in this room, but of parents believing their child is the winning lottery ticket. And this is what I have covered so much. So again, I've taken now a left or right turn from your question, but I've seen it over and over, ladies and gentlemen, in gymnastics and figure skating and tennis, where we put young people, mostly young girls in the case of those sports, they're on the discard pile before they get their driver's license. And the burnout factor, the pushing of the child, and mom and dad, again, believing, well, that kid, the college scholarship, which, by the way, I don't have to say this here in this room, but I'm a Northwestern grad, and I'm very involved at my alma mater, Northwestern. I'm on the board of trustees there, and our tuition is, is $75,000, $80,000 a year. I mean, basically, parents are looking at close to $100,000 now for 4 years, give or take, but with travel and, clothes and TVs and books and, you name it. So let's just say that, round that up to about $400,000. Well, no wonder parents go crazy at the thought that they've got the little volleyball player or the little basketball player or the soccer player, and that little 7 or 8-year-old, by the time they're going to college, it may well be $500,000 a year. And so, of course, that's hugely important. And that's a trickle down because you're watching it all the time, you're hearing about it all the time, and now sports takes good people and makes them crazy, right? and they're still good people. And I see it. Because I have a niece who plays volleyball, and I'll be at a game tonight at Langley High School, and I'm into it too. So I see how that happens, and I guess I'm just trying to make that very real for everyone in this room because I'm sure all of you have been through it, seen a neighbor, seen a kid, and sports is such a good thing. When sports are good, they're great, right? They're just great, and yet look at what can happen. So just kind of throwing that out there as part of the conversation as well.
Thank you.
So, Paul, I think it's an interesting question, and particular to use, the sort of Marxist view on this, because I think the irony of that is that while that was an observation made about capitalist societies, if you look today, it's actually authoritarian societies that are using sport for that purpose, to distract or from other issues, to use as a form of organization, imposing organization or order. I think on balance, that could be some of the negative aspects of sport. On balance, though, I think the net is positive, right? In the sense that for every authoritarian country that wants to use sport as a distraction, there are many other cases where sport is used to unite in nation building, in defining a new identity, a new era for the people. In my book, I look at one case of nation building where there was an effort to sort of combine the bureaucracies of the postal union of this country with this section of the country, with the postal union of that section of the country, and that was not really capturing the imagination of the people. But when they combined the football clubs, that really captured the imagination of the people and gave a sense of unity, right? It would be like New York State and Massachusetts merging, and if you merge the port authorities, like how many of us would really care, right? but if you merge the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, I think a lot of people could relate to that, and they could see that as union. So the other, I think, positive when you're thinking about sports is the role it's played in development. So Christine's covered all these Olympics. When you go back in history and you look at the '64 Olympics in Tokyo or the '88 Olympics in Seoul, these completely changed the face of these cities in incredibly positive ways. Whether it was public hygiene, it was globalization, of culture, all these sorts of things. And I see these all as net positives, even though there is this sort of, opiate of the masses criticism of sport and politics.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, to your provocation, is the sports community that we can sort of idealize, is it not a fairly, superficial sort of gossamer nature of community? I think that there's something to that argument. On the other hand, I think it's better than the alternative, right, which is potentially, nothing filling those rituals and sort of filling that void. I will say that one of the things that comes out, I think, of all the panelists and all the discussion here is two cardinal values of sports culture are community and escapism. And when political subjects enter into the world of sports culture, those often come at a cost of those two cardinal values. I conducted a survey with a colleague in political science that actually asked Americans how do they feel about these questions of sports and politics. We surveyed a nationally representative sample, and 50% of Americans in our sample say that sports and politics should not mix. Only 20% of Americans believe that it's okay for sports and politics to mix. So in terms of what fans, and I share with you, as a former journalist, I share with you a sensibility that these are issues that can't be left out, but I think that there is something from fan responses to these questions of divisiveness that are important, and certainly you see this pushback persist throughout sports history, right? Whether it was last week in the website Deadspin being shut down because they wouldn't stick to sports, whether you see this in the reaction to Colin Kaepernick's protest movement on behalf of Black Lives Matter issues, being told to stick to sports. Certainly we see a lot of the pushback coming from fans and coming from sports culture, even as sports culture also invisibly delivers quite a lot of messages about political subjects that people don't tend to think are relevant to sports culture. So just as a quick follow-up here, another part of our survey examined the relationship between sports fandom and attitudes about economic inequality, which I think is one of the defining political issues of our time. And we found that sports fans were far more comfortable than non-fans with economic inequality in society. They tended to view those who had achieved great wealth as deserving of it because of sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of mentality. And that ideology of meritocracy is baked deep within sports culture, and I think it transfers to some of our attitudes external to it.
Hearing the three of you speak now, I was hearing your remarks in light of what Christine said, that we haven't addressed amateur sports much, that this conversation has been about professional sports for the most part. I don't think there will be time for all three of you to address just what I'm about to say, but we want to go to questions from the audience. But let me at least put out there that I think there's a conflict, one I hope we get to examine over the next couple of days, between the values right over here, compassion, respect, love, enlightenment, balance, and joy, and the values that, if you ask me, predominate in our discussions about sports, which are the values of winning and losing, the values of being the best team, of beating your rival, of advancing to the finals, and so forth. Is it Pollyannish to wish that these values would check those values, or is there a role for us to play, or do we just have to kind of stand back and let it happen?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that train has left the station. I think it's only going to get and I'm really an optimistic person, I'm really a glass half full person, but I think the youth sport thing, the pressure to win, what we're seeing with college sports, the name, image, likeness conversation, where we're headed, which will be paying athletes, and if we pay the football players, we better be paying the field hockey players too. Title IX lawsuits are, there'll be thousands of them if you're not paying, if you're only paying men and not women at a university. And may I just make a big plug here for using the word men's, the pesky adjective men's, in front of the word basketball or in front of the word Final Four, because there is a women's. In the media, I've been fighting that for years and hoping for that. That we give women's sports its due and acknowledge there are two different basketball teams on this campus and on most campuses, men's and women's. It's not just the basketball game. It should be the men's basketball game, in my humble opinion. Anyway, I don't know what it's going to look like in 50 years. I'm a big, what is it going to look like in 25 years? I asked Roger Goodell, will we have football in 50 years? Of course, he said yes, but I'm not so sure about that. These are the issues, but no, we're going, and maybe some of you I know, who coach kids and know what's going on. I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I think it's going to get bigger and more cutthroat, and parents will care more. The more money that's in it, the more money that's available either for name, image, likeness, the more money if we do end up paying athletes, and the more money that, again, the value of college scholarships. I think it's going to be really hard to keep those wonderful values. I do think, however, it's our best bet. If you want to take a kid to your child to the best chance to get an autograph and just be treated with thanks that you've arrived, going to a high school sporting event or an Olympic sport event in a college campus, so by that I mean the so-called minor sports, men's, women's minor sports, is still your best bet. And the Olympics is still your best bet for great, wonderful moments. But obviously everything gets bigger, and with getting bigger, it can be fraught with more issues, including scandal and the cutthroat nature of our society.
Let me just jump in very quickly, following up on Christine's points here. When I think of what is inspiring and a place to sort of indulge hope, especially, I think particularly of the success of the U.S. women's national soccer team this summer. When you look historically at the data around how much media coverage is given over to women's sports, the research suggests at both the local and national level, it tends to get somewhere between 2 and 3% of coverage. And this has persisted for decades. You haven't seen much in the way of growth in that. And there are all sorts of historical structural factors of discrimination that are at play there. But certainly I think that what you saw this summer with regard to the sheer exhilaration of how that team performed on the pitch, the fact that if sports were stocks, I would buy soccer for the long term, for factors of globalization, for factors of the way in which gameplay is partitioned out in terms of time and duration of matches, things like that. And the fact that the team definitely was able to strike a political consciousness while at the same time, I think, being embraced by a really wide range of fans. So there's would be one that I would identify as inspiring.
So just very quickly, it's an interesting question, Paul, and I think one way to look at it is distinguishing it between all of us who observe sport, who observe it as a tool of diplomacy, as a tool of reconciliation, and we see all these as very positive things, right? And generally just very positive things. Marie Royce spoke last night at the Capital One Center, and Education and Cultural Affairs of the State Department runs this thing called Sports United. It used to be called Sports United. These programs where they do all sorts of, use sports as a vehicle for reconciliation between all sorts of different groups. And that's just, you cannot see that as negative. But there is the other aspect of it when you look at it, what you described, really from the athlete's perspective. Because when athletes are in there, they're doing this, they're playing by the same rules, but there's politics on any team, right? There are people that are looking for shortcuts. There are people who are lobbying for certain people to play over others. So like when I hear you ask that question, when I've studied this, when you look at it from the athlete's perspective, sometimes they have a very different view of what we all see of this wonderful fair play, meritocracy, all this sort of stuff. I'm reminded actually of a book I'm just finishing now by Seth Berkman, who wrote about the South Korean women's hockey team that played at the Pyeongchang Olympics. And he is writing it from the perspective of the players, right? And it's very interesting because the world looked at this as, a singular moment when, these rival regimes in North and South Korea were coming together in a united team of North Korean players and South Korean players playing together on the same hockey team for the first time in history. But from the players' perspective, it was all about inequity, because the good players were not necessarily getting ice time. Some of them couldn't even walk into the stadium because there's a limited number of people that can come in. So I think there is this sense that if you sometimes look at it from the athlete's perspective, it's not as wonderful as we all make it out to be.
We have time for a question or two from the audience, for either Christine, Victor, or Michael. Back, third of the way back, stage right.
Sort of a point to a little more discussion from you. You mentioned about Suzuki and the MAGA hat. I think the interesting thing about the Nats and their ability to win was that it was a very diverse team, probably was more diverse than most of us did, but they clearly, the emotion of bonding together and enjoying playing together overcame all that. And to me, I think maybe that is the message and the power of sports at sometimes. And to your point, there probably is a lot more politics going on than we ever see, but they still are able to overcome it.
Well, and to your point, there's a picture that I've seen online, I'm sure you can easily find it, of Sean Doolittle, who of course was very thoughtful in his comments about not wanting to go to the White House. The Washington Post had that story a few days ago. And his battery mate, of course, Kurt Suzuki. And, smiling, this is during the season, right? A picture of the two of them. Doolittle, anti-Trump, Suzuki, pro-Trump, which we did not know. Actually, I think we probably could have guessed about Doolittle. I know he's been very socially active in Oakland when he was there, and has spoken about these things. But Suzuki, no one knew anything about this. At least I didn't until he put on the MAGA hat. So, yeah, I think that picture really is an incredible message, and it's a nice image to see. And I think that it's clearly. We'll see how it plays out over the next few months. I mean, people are going to buy tickets and go to Nats games, but will Kurt Suzuki get booed? Probably. Donald Trump was booed vociferously. I was at that game and covering all three of the home games here at Credential and writing columns about them. And yeah, that was some serious booing of Donald Trump. And so and maybe then that led to the White House visit, and then you never know. I think that in the scheme of all the stories we're covering, that's lower, and it's going to fade away probably, unless there's backstories that come out about, because the PR people aren't talking, which is very unusual for them not to get back to me or other journalists. So, we'll see. But certainly the team, you're right. And there were 8 players who didn't go to the White House for various reasons, including Anthony Rendon. We have no idea why. You could almost field then a full team. 8 of them did not go. So we'll see. It'll be a very interesting kind of thing to follow, but I don't think it's a huge breaking story over the next few months for sure.
Question in the center.
Yeah, Paul, maybe you could offer your reflections or anyone else. Okay. As we look at sport and in parallel faith and organized religion, and how sport has grown in all over the world, and religion, organized religion has ebbed a bit. Where does in that parallel, where does sport fall short in terms of how organized religion and faith have contributed to humanity? Where does sport fall short?
I think that's a question for Michael.
I think that's a question for more gifted theologians in the audience than I am. I mean, very, very clearly, sports is sports provides people with I think many of the habits and values that religion traditionally did, but sports doesn't make any claims to eternal salvation that are at the heart of most religious endeavors from whatever faith context. And so I think that you know, again, there are those religious scholars far more versed than I to explain the ebbs and flows of secularism and identification with traditional religion. But I suspect, or I would argue that the way in which people still desire the things that they would have gotten from traditional religion, they are finding satisfied through being players and fans themselves in the realm of sport. The same habits of mind, the same way that it concentrates you, right, which is one of the amazing capacities of both religion and sport, the way it defines what good and evil is, right? And so again, I think that it's a metaphor, and so therefore as a metaphor, it's going to fall short of actually fulfilling, you know, the concrete nature of what religion provides. But you know, it's a substitute, and an imperfect one at that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Christine. Let's continue the conversation during the break. Thanks to everyone for your contributions.